All right, let's break this down in a way that's actually easy to understand. See, recently there was a huge buzz in the news on social media about a new study, which was published in a scientific journal called Nature Metabolism, suggested that eating too much protein might increase your risk of getting heart disease. Now, that sounds pretty freaking scary, right? But before we panic, let's take a closer look at what this study actually found and what it means for us. Now, do keep in mind, I've been on a carnivorous diet eating strictly high protein intake of meat since 2015. So the study had three main parts. In the first part, the researchers did an experiment with 14 people. They gave these people two different drinks. One had a small amount of protein, 10% of the calories, and the other had a lot of protein, 50% of the calories. Now, the amount of fat in both drinks was the same. So the main difference was the protein and carbohydrate content. And after people drank these drinks, the researchers took samples of their blood and looked at a specific type of white blood cells called monocytes. Now, monocytes are actually important because they can turn it into other cells that play a role in the buildup of plaque in our arteries, which can lead to possible heart disease. So what they found was that when people drank the high protein drink, a certain biological pathway called the mTOR pathway was actually activated in their monocytes. And this pathway is actually involved in a lot of things, including cell growth and metabolism. It makes sense that it would be activated when there's a lot of protein available. And they also saw some other changes in the monocytes that are related to the pathway being activated. For example, a process called autophagy, which is like a cellular cleanup mechanism, was actually reduced. So it's important to note that these changes happen just a few hours after drinking the high protein drink. Also, the drink they used wasn't actually pure protein. It was like a supplement that had other ingredients too. Technically, heavily processed bullshit drinks. Now, in the second experiment, they did something similar but with actual food instead of supplement drink. They had 9 people, each ate 2 different meals, one with a moderate amount of protein, 15% of calories, and one with a higher amount, 22% of calories. The fat and carb content of the meals were actually similar. Again, they saw the same activation of the mTOR pathway in the monocytes of the people who ate the higher protein meals. Now, the second part of the study was done in a lab dish with human and mouse cells. When they actually exposed these cells directly to protein, especially an amino acid called leucine, they also saw the activation of the mTOR pathway. Finally, in the third part, they did an experiment with mice. They actually fed the mice 4 different diets with increasing amounts of protein, from 7% of calories up to 46% of calories. And what they found was that the mice eating the diet with the highest amount of protein, 46%, had an increase in size of plaques in their arteries. So what does all this freaking mean? Well, it's an interesting study that was well conducted, but it also leaves a lot of questions unanswered. So for example, in the mouse experiment, they only saw the increase in plaque size with a very high protein diet. That's 46% of calories. So to put that in perspective, the average American gets around 16% of their calories from protein. Now, even in countries where people eat a lot of protein, it's rarely as high as 46%. And when you do the math, the mice on this high protein diet were getting about 50 grams of protein per kilogram of their body weight. In comparison, most humans eat around 1 gram of protein per kilogram of body weight. Now, it's not always accurate to directly compare mice and a human like this because they are different metabolisms. Mice eat a lot of more food relative to their body size than we do. But still, it seems like the amount of protein these mice were eating was extremely high even for mouse. Now, the researchers tried to argue that the mice eating this high protein diet were actually getting about twice as much protein as they would from their normal lab food, and that this might be similar to a human eating twice the recommended amount of protein. but that comparison seems a bit of a stretch. So while the study shows that feeding a mouse a very large amount of protein can actually increase the plaques in their arteries, now it's hard to know if the same thing would happen in humans, and if so, at what level of protein intake. And this kind of study, which looks at biological pathways and uses cell cultures and lab animals, is what we call a mechanistic study. It's great for raising interesting questions and understanding how things work at a molecular level, but it's not designed to directly tell us what will happen in humans. And the researchers suggest that their findings might help explain why some human studies have found that high protein intake, especially from animal sources, is actually linked to a higher risk of heart disease, while plant protein seems to be linked to a lower risk. However, there are other possible explanations for this difference. See, for example, we consistently see that eating fish, which is an animal protein, is actually linked to a lower risk of heart disease. And if animal protein itself was a problem, we'd expect fish to actually increase heart disease risk, but we actually see the opposite. And it seems more likely that the differences in heart disease risk between animal and plant protein are due to other factors like the types of fat that comes along with the protein. Plant proteins often come with more unsaturated fats, which are thought to be good for heart health, while some animal proteins like red meat come with more saturated fat, which is more satiating. So in conclusion, this study is interesting and poorly conducted, but it doesn't prove that high protein intake increases heart disease risk in humans. We actually need more research in humans to determine if there's a certain level of protein or leucine intake that could be harmful for heart health. But for now, the evidence suggests that other factors like the type of fat you eat are more important for heart health than actually protein intake. But it's always good to eat a balanced diet and not to actually go overboard on any one nutrient. And it's also important to remember that nutrition science is quite complex, and it's rare for a single study to completely change our understanding or recommendations. See, media headlines often sensationalize findings, but the reality is usually more nuanced. And the best approach is to actually focus on eating a variety of whole unprocessed foods, including a balanced protein and from both plant and animal sources, healthy fats, and plenty of fruits and maybe some vegetables. Now, this kind of balanced, varied diet has been consistently linked to good health outcomes. Now, if you're concerned about your diet or your risk of heart disease, hire me as your clinical nutritionist, as I can help you assess your individual needs and create an eating plan that's right for you. Remember, health is about the big picture, the overall pattern of your diet and lifestyle over time. One study, one meal, or one nutrient is rarely going to make or break your health. It's the consistent choices you make day in and day out that really matters. So don't let headlines scare you or make you think you need to drastically change your diet based on one freaking study. Instead, focus on making informed, balanced choices that support your overall health and well-being. And remember, if you have questions, as your healthcare provider, I'm here to help guide you.